The Hudson Bay Pattern Axe is a very popular axe. It's great. I love them. A lot of axe people love them. It's just a classic looking axe pattern and has kind of an interesting history, really, that survives on to this day. So I grabbed a bunch of my axes, a bunch of my Hudson Bay patterns, and do a little brief history of this pattern and some things to look at if you're collecting or thinking of buying one of these to use. So the origin of this pattern goes all the way back to the fur trading days, right? And the Hudson Bay Company, that's where it gets its name. The Hudson Bay Company dominated the fur trade in North America. And a lot of these European trappers, just in their daily work, seemed to prefer a kind of, a belt axe, right? It was a belt axe or a camp axe, a big hatchet, maybe we'd call it today. And the trade pattern, right, was just metal folded around a stick, essentially, and did not necessarily have to have any kind of pull. So it was just useful, light, sharpen it up, cheap. And so the trade axe was useful for trappers. It was kind of ubiquitous on the frontiers, and were traded a lot with Native Americans, all right? And Native American peoples, there were thousands maybe, were traded with the tribes where the trappers were working. And this trapper axe and other patterns from other sources were a huge part of the introduction of metal blades to the indigenous peoples. And the tomahawk already existed. The tomahawk was already a weapon of the Native Americans, but with the metal blades it really became an iconic thing. And now today, all of us who grew up, watching television, watching spaghetti westerns, watching, movies, the image of the tomahawk is a huge thing, and people love tomahawks today, and it's, it just really evokes that time and that era. And so it's not surprising, if we're attracted to this design that has such a rich history. But we can look to the Collins Company in the United States for bringing the modern Hudson Bay pattern back into the axe world somewhere in the earliest 20th century. And so you can find Collins Hudson Bays, marked in all kinds of crazy ways. It's always very difficult to date Collins axes. These are probably example of some of the earliest Collins Hudson Bay patterns, which continued up until at least the late 60s, and then maybe survived with other marks of Collins. The best Collins axes were the Collins Legitimus brand, all right? The Collins Legitimus. And here is a Collins Legitimus Hudson Bay pattern from somewhere 40s, 50s, 60s. That's where we guess this one dates to, all right? And it really shows the Collins interpretation of the modern pattern. And it's interesting, there's some design features that are interesting here, including a notch. Collins had little notches right there, which today, collectors today are always kind of on the lookout. Like, if it has a notch, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a Montreal pattern. Maybe it's a Rhineland pattern. But there you see it right there. Thousands and thousands of Collins Hudson Bays had this notch back in the day. I think this is a very functional pattern. I really do. You get a lot of edge sweep here. It's really nice at a good angle that, I kind of dig. I'm into lately if you're watching my videos. Very thin cheeks. Very thin cheeks. This one here, it's been a little stone ground by myself, right? There's hardly any secondary bevel. These cheeks are so thin, all right? And this comes out at a 22.5-degree angle. And I bring that up now because a lot of the current Hudson Bays have a lot fatter cheeks. It's a very different design than these Collins. Kind of back at the peak of their power. So in 1966, just huge changes in the business due to the chainsaw, really, that kind of wiped out North American axe makers, more or less. Led to a lot of consolidations, led to a lot of sales and bankruptcies. But Man Edge Tool Company, another American company, bought Collins. And not long after launched a truly iconic collector brand, the Norlund axes. All right, that was a Man Edge Tool Company line, and it was launched as Norlund. And there's a lot to say about the Norlund. So they're very popular with collectors still to this day. And I can't help but feel that, 1968, that's when this line rolls out and kind of becomes maybe the mass production brand in the 70s, really, in the United States. It was it. How cleverly man actually capitalized on a lot of cultural things going on at the time, right? Television, movies, fascination with frontier life, particularly the kind of cartoonish Disneyland versions of that life, and Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and a lot of shows. And right up till, if you go to Disneyland today, what's there? Frontierland. I mean, that whole interpretation, it's basically Norlund. It's basically how Norlund branded their axes: canoes, trapper, kind of Native American iconography. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. And they sold a lot. And I think it really touched a lot of people. And a lot of people are fascinated by it. And brilliantly, they kind of the center of the whole thing was the Tomahawk. Okay, we mentioned the Tomahawk. That's how they marketed their Hudson Bay pattern. So this is a Norlund Tomahawk or Hudson Bay in really good condition, basically new old stock. All right, not the best specimen I've ever seen. Okay, these axes were higher quality, but over time, look right here, you got a knot in the handle. They're notoriously, at least the ones I've seen, handles weren't all that great and often warped over time, or, there were issues with them. But it was mass production. It was a mass production axe, okay? It was not a collector's axe, and there really wasn't any kind of thing called bushcraft back in, 1971. So people weren't looking for that kind of thing. So it was a great axe. It was really good. And, it had this bright engineer tape on the top, which was probably, some Forest Service thing, like, oh, it's easy to find. It was just marketed really, really well. But the comparison of the patterns is interesting. I've read in places that, of course, when Man took over Collins, they just took the dies, and this is the same axe. But when I compare these two, the Norlund is actually a bigger axe. It's actually larger in almost every dimension. The pole is wider. The pole is a little longer. The Norlund's a little bit longer, and I don't think it's edge wear. The notch now has disappeared. That's where the notch disappears, is with the Norlunds. But the cheeks are still thin. They're still thin. And this factory grind is 22.5 degrees. Right? Clearly influenced by the Collins, Hudson Bays, and others. Still a sharp axe for back in the day. Now this is an interesting piece. This is a Snow and Neely, all right? All original stuff. Got the sheath and everything. Check that out, all right? Quite different. Beefy handle. Look at that palm swell. Like a mallet or something, okay? And you can see where the Snow and Neely Hudson Bays are starting to get, okay? How do they compare? I'm not sure how to date the Snow and Neely, but my gut, I would love to get viewer comments if you know what era this was from. But looking at the marketing, it's just got an 80s feel to it, right? It's a Maine axe, made in Maine. And it's just got kind of, the font and the colors and the sticker. This is feeling kind of 80s, kind of the Bob Newhart show, all right? So if it is, it's kind of a transitional piece. In the history of this pattern, and some new and some, I guess, more contemporary design features are starting to appear. The bits are starting to get thicker. This with the Snow and Neely is starting to get thicker, okay? And this angle is not nearly as aggressive. This factory grind is 30 degrees. I think over time, the length of the head has become shorter. They've gone in a different direction with edge angles. This is pretty much squared up on the pole, which is a trend you see continuing in the modern council tool Hudson Bays. Now, I don't have the velvet cut version. My brother has one, and he's got his velvet cut Hudson Bay axe, and it's really, really nice. If you're not familiar, council tool makes a velvet cut line. It's a premium line, and really nice. And he's got a sweet one, but it's the exact same pattern as this. This is the more value-oriented, less well-finished version of the pattern, and it's a lot like Mr. Snow and Neely. It's got a pretty wedgy profile here, and thicker cheeks, convexing down into a 30-degree at angle there from the factory. 2 pounds, kind of the traditional size, although there have been bigger and there have been smaller, but 2 pounds is about right for a Hudson Bay. And that's what you get with the Council tool. And you can see that continuing with the Council tool, you know, just going in different directions a little bit there. And it's square on the pull. Like I said, it is a popular pattern, so there's lots. This is my Trail Boss, markets itself as a Hudson Bay. But you know, there's the notch, and it's got kind of a flare up here on the toe side of the head, you know, kind of a flare. Some people might take exception to that actually being a Hudson Bay. But hey, whatever. That's the way they're calling it. In terms of actually adding something to the design, you got to look to the Wetterlings Hudson Bay, soon to be gone from this earth, but actually made some contributions in an interesting way to this pattern. So the Swedish version of the Hudson Bay is a thick boy. I mean, it is just a big, sloping, thick wedge in the form of a Hudson Bay axe. It's beautiful. Well finished. Like I said, there won't be many more made. I don't think there's any more being made. What's made is made. The Wetterlings and the Collins Legitimus side by side shows just how different these are. Really different. Cheeks, bits, the whole thing. In fact, the Swede comes in at 35 degrees on that angle. That's the factory angle, 35 degrees. And it's well ground, right? They're not sloppy at Wetterlings. So 22.5, 35. Very different patterns. Now what the heck is this? What? Is this a Hudson Bay? Probably not. This is an Italian Rinaldi. This is a Rinaldi axe. This is a completely different design of axe. This is a slip fit head. It's huge. It's long, almost kind of a plank-like handle. Very wedgy, very wedgy. For you gap guys, oh, there's lots of gaps on a Rinaldi. They don't care. Very sharp, very quick axe. Lots of fun. Is that a Hudson Bay? I'm not going to say it's a Hudson Bay, but influence much? Look what happens when we put the top parallel to each other and the poles about even. I'm going to pull the Rinaldi back on the plane just a little bit. That is nearly an exact parallel line for the bit alignment. The Rinaldi being absolutely straight and the Collins being perfectly curved. Somebody knew what they were doing. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed making it. This was not by any means an exhaustive list of all the kinds of Hudson Bays out there. There were many others as well. Collins made lots of different kinds, labeled in different ways, marked in different ways, including some for the United States Army. At some point, I'm guessing, you know, mid-50s, Collins Legitimus axes were used with Army issue, and you'll find them with green paint on them. There's also lots of no-name Hudson Bays out there that were probably a paper label. It's almost impossible to tell what an axe was without the paper label. If it was a paper label, makes sense, right? True Temper also got in on the Hudson Bay thing for a while with a wood slasher version of the Hudson Bay. They're hard to find. They're really actually very rare, I think. You don't see many, but a lot of that's because they were forge marked with the, you know, True Temper Kelly Works marks on them as far as the ones I've seen. So, you know, you may have one and you wouldn't know unless you had like that red paint from the wood slasher. And of course, no list of Hudson Bays would be complete without mentioning the Council tool, El Lobo. Such a bold design. Everyone loves the El Lobo. They probably weren't very popular at the time, but this is just my guess, like, you know, kind of a gimmick axe or something. Boy, they're popular now. So if you have a nice El Lobo, get in touch with your local axe collector, because he'd be very happy to see it. I'd love to hear your comments, any wisdom or lore you might have about Hudson Bay axes. Just comment below and get a discussion going. We're all learning all the time. So thanks for watching.